It is easy to forget what a scary world it was at the dawn of the space age. The Cold War was at its most chilling. The Soviets had already launched the first satellites and the first cosmonauts. The U.S. was desperate to catch up, but everything it tried seemed not to work. America did not just need better boosters, it needed bigger heroes. It found 7, and the one with whom it most fell in love was John Glenn.
We hadn't really thought that any nation could even touch us technically, and all at once, here was this bunch of Soviets over there, for heaven's sakes, outdoing the United States of America in technical and scientific things.
Glenn and his fellow Mercury astronauts promised to challenge the communists on the high ground of space. It was as if they were willing to go into single combat, Mercury against Vostok, David versus Goliath. Why were men like Glenn willing to go? Tom Wolfe called it the right stuff, the confidence shared only by the hottest pilots that they could fly to the very edge of death and come back every time.
They were trained, although they were human beings with emotions and reactions, to control those, and above all, to be part of the system, an enormous burden to carry by anyone.
Almost every astronaut ever born has disavowed the notion of the right stuff, but the term is stuck.
To me, the right stuff is the lack of selfishness. The ability to say that I'm not afraid of risk, because I know when I do these dangerous things, there's an incredible benefit.
John Glenn had done a lot of dangerous things. As a fighter pilot, he had flown 59 combat missions in World War II and 27 in Korea. As a test pilot, he had been to a lot of funerals for colleagues who had pushed their planes too hard. But nobody had tried to fly an Atlas rocket, and there seemed good reason. Glenn and his 6 fellow astronauts were taken to see a test launch. Glenn took his children to see a test launch. It exploded.
I can remember being shocked and stunned and overwhelmed and questioning both my mom and dad about whether this was going to happen to him.
Then it was 2 a.m. on February 20th, 1962. Launch day. After no fewer than 10 scrubbed attempts, Bill Douglas was the Mercury flight surgeon.
Came up, and that was easy to do because I hadn't slept.
Douglas says he would have loved to fly in space himself, but he thought the astronauts had something others lacked. Douglas was nervous, Glenn was cool. He had slept well. He suited up to climb into Friendship 7.
I remember shaking his hand, and I remember he held on to my hand for a long time. I was choked up, just couldn't have said anything.
From the launch pad, Glenn made a final phone call to Fanny.
He said that he was just going down to the corner to get chewing gum. And that brings tears to my eyes even now, because I didn't know maybe that was going to be our last conversation.
Godspeed, John Glenn. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
Friendship 7 headed for orbit. The Atlas rocket did not fail.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Glenn was having a terrific time. He circled the Earth once and began his second orbit.
Oh, that view is tremendous.
And then trouble. A signal on the ground warning the capsule's heat shield for re-entry might be loose.
If the heat shield isn't there, you would not come. The whole spacecraft would disintegrate. It would burn up on re-entry.
Anxiously, controllers told Glenn not to drop off his retro rockets, which were strapped on over the heat shield. Bill Douglas felt helpless.
I wasn't watching it then. I was over in the corner with my hands folded.
7, this is Cape. You read, over.
I can remember that being the most terrifying for me, and I thought, he's gone.
Friendship 7, this is Cape, over. Friendship 7, this is Cape. How do you read, over?
There was only static. And then, a voice.
All right, you're reading you loud and clear. How you doing? condition is good, but that was a real fireball, boy.
Glenn had made it. 3 orbits of the Earth in just under 5 hours.
Probably the heart rate in the Mission Control Center averaged something higher than his heart rate was.
After that, it was ticker tape parades and a medal from the president, a president who deemed him too great a hero to risk on another flight. So for 36 years, Glenn has been waiting for what the right stuff demands, the chance to go back out and challenge the heavens again.
Would I have preferred to go back up as flight commander after the several years training I'd have had to have? Well, of course. But that isn't the way things worked out.
How you doing? Good.
Today, in these post-Cold War times, stuff is defined differently. NASA looks less for pilots than PhDs. The shuttles they fly may not be without risk, but they do look routine. So where's the excitement? In watching John Glenn having the time of his life.
Well, I am, and I've never worked harder in my life.
Glenn is at an age when he could easily slow down. But there's something in him that still needs to live on the edge, to push his limits, to do more. And that, perhaps, is why America seems so taken with its returning pioneer. Ned Potter, ABC News.
We've been taking a closer look at time this week, not so much the time of our lives, but the time in our lives, or the seeming lack of it. How often in this century have we been lulled into buying something because we were told that we'd save time? You know, time to contemplate, to be with our families, to be ourselves. And of course, when the microchip came along to save us even more time, promises, promises. Here's ABC's Ned Potter.
Time was when people thought technology would set them free.
Slim and sleek.
3-day weekends would be common, certainly by 1960.
Welcome.
Dream on. The technology is here.
You've got mail.
From the computer to the kitchen microwave, from the electronic organizer to the automatic teller, from VCRs to voicemail.
You have 3 new voice messages.
But it's not as if Bill and Jane Balter really have their weekends free.
There's not a day that goes by I don't do something that is related to work and facilitated by the technology that we have.
I really find tragedy things help you fit more into the day.
The Balters have a PC, a dishwasher, a cordless phone.
But the reality is that these time-saving devices almost never really save us time. What they do is they make something easier so we do more of it.
And that's the dilemma of today's harried time. Every innovation is a mixed blessing. Indeed, the cell phone may free you from the office, but now you take the office with you, cutting deals as you cut through traffic.
Bye-bye.
A word processor lets you write a letter faster, but think how much time you now spend making revisions, or improvements, or needs.
I think most people would agree that they end up with a better product, but more quickly is really quite an exaggeration.
So against the onslaught of technology, people to their limits.
We just can't keep speeding up and doing everything faster and doing more and more and more. Something's got to give.
Maybe something will. Many people still believe that hope is right around the corner. As computers become more common and easier to use, they have the power to give us what we were promised back in the 50s.
It's allowing you to use the time the way you'd like it to be used yourself, as opposed to having technology that dictates how you have to use the time for you.
But does that really mean time to think, to rest, to be with family? Ask the Balters.
I definitely get more done. I don't have more free time because I'm always doing, but I get a lot more done.
And only you can say if that's made you happier. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
Finally, from us this evening, the art of the cell. In this case, the cutting-edge technology which enables us to see the latest gimmick in television advertising. Here is ABC's Ned Potter, many times over.
Baby, baby, it looks like it's gonna hail.
You watch an ad like this and you think those dancers are pretty good, but
Looks like it's gonna hail.
wait a minute, they're not that good. So you flip the channel and you realize things are freezing in half the commercials on TV. Whether it's horses, or kids, or lovers, and you ask, how'd they do that? How do they do that? Well, sit back and get comfortable, because at first the explanation may have you throwing up your hands in confusion. Pretty cool, don't you think? I'm being photographed here by a film technique called time track, which makes it look as if a camera's moving around me while I'm frozen in place.
It's basically just a new thing to perceive, I think, and that's the main reason that it's interesting to us.
Dayton Taylor, a New York filmmaker who invented time track, and here's how it works. Regular movies are a succession of still pictures, shot one after another, played fast enough to give the sense of motion. Time track is just the opposite. Instead of one camera shooting 24 pictures a second, Taylor's built a ring of cameras that go off at once. So every one of these lenses is taking a picture of the object at the same instant.
And yeah, at the same instant, but from a very slightly different angle.
So when we did our little stunt a minute ago, Dayton and his crew shot 80 pictures of me. They were scanned into a computer.
I'm going to try to stabilize on an eyeball
To create one smooth sequence of a frozen moment. Ad agencies love it. Competitors are cranking out commercials.
And action!
Because freezing the action, they hope, will make you remember the watch or the can of beer. Oh. At least until you go out and buy it. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
From the Discovery Channel and ABC News, Discovery Newsbreak.
Good evening. The Near-Earth Asteroid spacecraft began its year-long approach to the Eros asteroid today. The approach was scheduled for last month, but the probe's engines malfunctioned. And a recent poll shows nearly half of Americans would avoid traveling by plane next New Year's when the Millennium computer bug disrupt air traffic control. That's Discovery Newsbreak.
I'm very excited. I mean, how often is an ocean discovered?
It looks we have found the smoking gun.
Yeah, these are really mind-blowing pictures.
The breaks in the ice of Europa suggest that it's been shifting, most likely floating on a hidden sea beneath. And to understand why that's so tantalizing, it is perhaps best to look at Earth, to see the heat vent in the darkest parts of the ocean bottom or the jumbled ice flows of the Arctic. These are perhaps the most inhospitable regions of the entire planet, but even here, life thrives.
Many of us believe that a planetary ocean or a significant body of water on a planet is a kind of a planetary nursery, if you will, or an incubator in which life not only may be sustained, but it may actually originate.
How so? Because in addition to water, two other things may also be present on Europa. First, heat, most likely from volcanic activity inside the little moon. And second, organic compounds, perhaps delivered by comets crashing into the surface over the eons. Those compounds are the building blocks of life. Put all those things together, water, heat, organic compounds, and you are led to the ultimate question. 600 million miles from could there actually be life in Europa's seas?
You put those ingredients together with enough time, and on Earth, those same ingredients in less than 1 billion years gave rise to life.
The implications are tremendous, that life, special as we think it is on Earth, may not be so special after all. Perhaps if some very basic conditions are met, life is inevitable.
Maybe DNA is the only way to make a structure we call living, but maybe there are undreamed of other ways, and I'd sure like to know that, because no question in biology could be more interesting or more important.
Someday, no doubt, a ship more advanced than Galileo will probe Europa's hidden sea. If it finds life there, our view of life on Earth will change. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York. For the last 5 years, marine biologist Gary Davis has been counting fish off the coast of California.
Things are not like they used to be. It's kind of falling apart. We've got problems of pollution and overfishing.
Davis and his teams of volunteers have gone to the same underwater spots year after year, documenting the decline in populations.
We see declines in fish like white sea bass and halibut and rockfish.
With scientists getting more and more concerned about the falling numbers, this year they've taken the census nationwide to get a bigger picture of the problem.
Little bike, so better get busy and write down here.
In the coral reefs off Florida, ocean scientist SYLVIA documents the decline in reef fish, where whole species have disappeared.
Well, there's remarkable reduction in especially the kinds of you particularly like to eat, such as the groupers and the snappers.
Davis says overfishing is wiping out one species after another.
We can look at the ways in which fisheries are sustained, and that is kind of a frontier approach of use up everything available. When it's gone, you move on to the next species. So it's serial depletion, that you use up one thing, move on to the next resource base.
The last 20 years, the Atlantic swordfish population has declined by 50%. In New England and Canada, cod, flounder, and haddock down by as much as 95%. And on the West Coast, there are over 100 areas where salmon have disappeared altogether. Jean-Michel Cousteau, son of the famed explorer Jacques Cousteau, has joined the nationwide effort to count the fish.
We're overfishing. And when I say we, it's the world over. It's not just the country. We're harvesting fish at the time that we shouldn't, for example, when they reproduce.
Globally, fish are in trouble. It's easy to understand when you think of fish as wildlife. We are doing to the fish in the sea what we did to the other creatures, the birds and the mammals.
Like an elephant's ivory tusk or a crocodile's skin, the most endangered fish bring in the most money for the fishermen. Think about this. Atlantic bluefin tuna, population's down 90%, one large fish to a sushi restaurant in Tokyo for up to $70,000. In Russia, sturgeon are killed for their eggs, caviar. They are now so rare that a single can be worth $250,000. And if the plundering continues, scientists say, sturgeon could disappear in 5 to 10 years.
Nothing in the history of the planet has prepared these natural systems for the kind of aggressive behavior that almost seems like waging war on the oceans.
A war waged with huge ships and mile-long nets. The world's fishing fleet has doubled in size since 1970, creating an imbalance in the oceans.
It's not infinite. There's a point beyond which things just do collapse.
Down a little bit.
So what to do? In California, squid fishermen are trying to prevent a collapse of their own. Over the last 3 years, the demand for squid has soared, making it the leading commercial seafood species in the state. It is also the only one left in the state that is unregulated. There are no limits on who can fish and how many can be caught.
Fishing in the beginning, I would notice that we would catch just a portion of the resource because the demand was low. Now with the high demand, we're catching everything that we can find and then looking for more.
David Crabbe has made his living off squid fishing for the last 20 years. Having seen the consequences of overfishing, he is pushing for a moratorium on the number of boats while scientists study the dwindling population.
I want to say, hey, let's stop, let's do some research, because this is something I'm going to try to keep making a living at for a long time to come.
The key issue to this is to try to come up with some kind of a magic number that will allow the boats, the industry, to bring in a certain percentage of what is out there, at the same time to allow a to continue to spawn and to propagate the next generation of squid. And whatever that magic number is, we don't know yet.
And that is why marine biologists will keep up the count, trying to come up with hard numbers to better understand the ocean's plight. Potter, ABC News. Every single day since the first section was launched in 1986, Space Station Mir has circled the Earth 16 times. That's more than 60,000 orbits in the unforgiving vacuum of space. After 11 years, the strain shows, both and the astronauts and cosmonauts who fly it.
Obviously, one accident after another shows that it is not safe.
Congressman James Sensenbrenner chairs the House Science Committee. He's gotten NASA to give Mir a careful review before sending any more Americans.
They are pretty much pushing their own personal limits and their own psychological limits.
Astronaut Jerry Lininger flew on Mir from February to May.
Once again in this view, Lininger in the foreground.
He worries about his colleague Michael Foale, who's up there now.
I think we ought to think about what we should do with the Mir.
Astronaut James Lovell commanded the near-disastrous Apollo 13. He says it's time to give Mir a respectful retirement, soon before someone gets killed.
The mirror was designed to last 5 years. It's been up over 11 years, and I don't think it has been up as much as it should have been over the intervening years.
But ask in 2 other places, at Mission Control outside Moscow and the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and you'll hear an opposite answer. To the Russians, Mir is the crown jewel of their once vast space program. To the Americans, who see the future as cooperation with adversaries, Mir is certainly worth the risk. Frank Culbertson of NASA.
If we're going to be a spacefaring nation and continue to operate in space, it's important that we learn everything we can about what it takes to operate in space.
The debate over the future of the Russian space station has been building as its crews endured breakdown after breakdown. A fire in February, 2 broken oxygen systems, a coolant leak which shut down the carbon dioxide scrubbers. And then, last month, a crash with a remote-controlled cargo ship. It punctured the skin of Mir's newest module, called Spectre, and left Mir with less than half its normal power supply.
It's a serious situation, and fire aboard an aircraft or spacecraft and decompression are the 2 most dangerous things that can happen on a orbiting vehicle. So, you know, we've had both of those.
Today's accident happened ironically as the crew was practicing to repair the last one. They cut off the ship's guidance system as they were working on how to restore its electric supply.
It appears that they inadvertently disconnected the wrong cable.
Without attitude control, the 120-foot-long station began slowly to tumble, a serious problem because its large, flat panels cannot provide electricity unless they face the sun. Within hours, its batteries drained, vital systems had to shut off, including light and ventilation. The crew had to move their small Soyuz escape craft so they could use its thrusters gradually to reduce the tumbling.
We have lost navigational control. We are now in a free float pattern.
Perhaps it's no surprise that as Russian controllers fought the latest battle, NASA gave Congress something that the Science Committee has been demanding for months. A pledge that U.S. engineers will certify Mir as safe for U.S. astronaut Foale, even though the station is Russian property.
If the situation is unsafe, the entire crew, including Mr. Foale, should go into the space lifeboat and return to Earth as soon as possible.
Russian controllers insist the crew has always had that option. They can board their Soyuz and be on the ground in 6 hours. But that's the last thing either space agency wants to do. The cash-poor Russians actually make a lot of money by flying Americans. NASA is paying $400 million for astronauts to live on Mir. Meanwhile, the White House looks at space as a place to work peacefully with Russia. It's a lot better than worrying about the nuclear arsenal.
Piloted spaceflight has always been about politics, and the science has always been necessary, and Mir is no exception.
John Pike of the American Federation of Scientists has often annoyed NASA with skeptical questions. But when it comes to Mir, he's behind them.
Over the last 6 months, they've had a series of very serious problems, but I think as long as the Russians think that their crew is safe, Americans ought to be up there with them.
We are left then with 2 very different views. The 2 space agencies argue that space is important, that cooperating up there is better than glaring at each other down here. Others say all that's true, but lives are at stake on the disabled Russian space station. For technical or political reasons, the aging Mir may not survive much longer. This is Ned Potter for Nightline.
On the American agenda tonight, what may be the richest pharmaceutical laboratory in the world. It would take an entire day and night to get there from here in New York to Miami, change planes for Curacao, change planes again for Paramaribo, capital of the small South American nation Surinam. Then take a smaller plane to the village of ASINDOPO, where there's a little grass landing strip. And then you're only 15 minutes away by canoe. In ASINDOPO, they have secrets that American drug companies will pay a great deal of money for. The secrets of the rainforest. Our agenda reporter Ned Potter is there.
They say Sir Walter Raleigh came here in 1595 looking for gold. He didn't find any, but the people who live in these jungles may have something much more valuable. These are the Saramacaners, Surinam, near South America's northern coast. Descendants of escaped African slaves lived in isolation for centuries. All around them are some of the world's last untouched rainforests. In this vast tangle of life, scientists say the Sarah McConnors have medicines that could be life-saving to us.
So many of our drugs have been derived from natural plant products, and yet we've only chipped away at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's out there.
Russ Mittermeier says the best way to save the rainforests is to find economic alternatives to selling them for timber. The best way to do that, he says, is to win the friendship of Surinam's forest people. Once distrustful, they now welcome the conservationists. Conservation International has made a contract with the villagers, promising that if their forest knowledge leads to a marketable medicine, they get 50% of the royalties. In exchange for the first, the tribespeople are showing outsiders around their pharmacy. This man is named Jelonti. He's a shaman, a traditional healer. If someone has an illness, he knows which bark or leaf will best cure it.
This is for anemic blood. If your blood is low, you make a tea out of it, you drink it, and it makes your blood stronger. This is a lukutu. It's a plant that if you have a high fever, you cut the leaves, you boil them, and then you wash yourself with it, and that removes the fever. This particular bark is used, if you cut yourself, you use the juice from this to stop bleeding and the powder to increase healing.
Jelonti boils the lokotu leaves to bathe the young man and break his fever. He spreads sap on another's wounded leg. At one point, he hacks down a vine. Juice is so plentiful, it pours from the plant. What's it used for? He demonstrates on himself.
This is an eye remedy. It's dripped into the eyes. It's used against glaucoma.
Shamans have been using the forest for centuries, and modern scientists take them seriously. After all, 40% of today's medicines have plant origins. Aspirin comes from willows. Taxol, the cancer drug, from the Pacific. Vincristine, used against Hodgkin's disease, comes from the rosy periwinkle. So here in Suriname, the conservationists take hundreds of samples from the shamans, and 3,000 miles away in Connecticut, Bristol-Myers Squibb is putting the plant extracts through thousands of tests, hoping to find cures for major diseases. The National Cancer Institute and the National Institutes of Health have poured millions of dollars into projects like this. They could lead to major breakthroughs, and for drug companies, big profits.
We hope it will benefit the local community, but I don't think I would be in it if this company was not going to get a drug out of it.
If it works, conservationists hope there will be a tremendous fringe benefit. All of a sudden, the Suriname rainforest will have financial value, worth more in its natural state. Loggers cut it down. Major corporations will have an interest in keeping the forest standing.
All we need is one drug that goes to market in the United States and Europe, and all of a sudden we're going to be generating more income than any of these logging concessions could over the course of a decade.
Many people think of conservation as costing rather than saving money. But the one in Suriname are spreading around the world, trying to prove the forests are worth saving because someday they may save us. This is Ned Potter for the American Agenda.
The Discovery Channel and ABC News, Discovery Newsbreak.
Good evening. The Mir space station, scheduled to crash in the Pacific this year, may stay up for 3 more. Russia says an unnamed investor has offered to fund the station's operations. And a report out today unveils a new technology in the fight against the AIDS virus. The treatment uses a special protein that triggers HIV-infected cells to self. That's Discovery Newsbreak.
Let's turn to an author and poet to move us on. T.S. Eliot wrote, "Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" Here's ABC's Ned Potter.
If technology is supposed to make your life simpler, then why does the average office worker get 30 emails, 20 voicemails, 18 pieces of regular mail, 15 faxes, and 11 Post-it notes every day?
My habit, though I hate to admit it to anyone, is that when my alarm goes off at 4:30 in the morning, the first thing I do is reach for the telephone and I listen to voicemail.
Meredith Fisher ran an international survey of office workers. 60% said they were struggling.
People feel like they cannot get enough time to really do the work that they've been hired to do.
Some people say the data flood is a very good thing. Imagine the Wall Street types who can't afford to miss that one hot tip.
Actually, the more information for me, the better. But it is a constant selection process, and I'm always reading.
But are we wiser, happier, more fulfilled because we're wired in? Take the doctor, for example, whose patients are now asking for the hottest new treatment they just found on the internet.
New treatments aren't the best treatments. Proven treatments are the best treatments.
And that sort of distinction gets lost in the digital age. With so much information coming at people from all sorts of different directions, it becomes harder and harder to figure out what's proven, what's reliable, and what. Which brings us to the Library of Congress, the largest storehouse of knowledge in the world, with 116 million books, tapes, maps, and manuscripts on file. Worry that the deluge of digital information will only make things worse.
But we have this kind of a very dangerous that with a zapper and a mouse you can just sit in your house and you'll get access to everything you need.
James Billington warns there's a difference between information, the stuff made so abundant by digital technology, and knowledge, the insight we get when someone has had a chance to sort through things and figure them out. How do you get knowledge when there's too much information? Maybe only one answer.
Turn off the computer, even shut the book on occasion, and let your mind flourish and work.
So in that spirit, there will be no more information in this story. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.